Shabbat Shalom, Senbet Salam. This is Wyndham Yarden, and this is our second Torah portion reading and feeding, or what's known as Noch, right? Noch in the Ethiopic, in the first language, and also called Noah. This Torah portion, before we even get directly into it, there's some contextual facts and evidence that I want to share with my brothers, my Wendamoch, and with others to also study and compare and contrast along with your studies in this Torah portion, reading and feeding. So once again, Shabbat Shalom, Senbet Salam, Yeshua, Shalom in Yeshua's Shem, in the Hashem of Yeshua HaMoshiach, to the glory of Einai Abba and Father, his Father, his Abba, our Abba, his Elohim, our Elohim, the true El Elohe Israel, of we, the lost, now found black sheep of the house of Israel. So we're touching on Noach, right, or Noah, right, in the Bible. Something interesting just occurred to I and I, because we want to show you 37 images, at least the website is solvinglight.com, where they present certain evidence and also speculate on, the truism of the Noah, the biblical story, and also the recording of this self-same, or similar rather, this similar, not the same, but there are similarities, interesting similarities. Now, there's many who really question whether there was Noah's flood. I think that questioning comes from the spirit of the children of disobedience in that sense. And just because you question doesn't mean that you're one of the children, but that is in the conspiracy or breathing together. That's in the spirit, if you can understand. That's in the spirit of doubting something that is obvious. If all these ancient cultures, right, which were as diverse and different from the Hebrew, also recorded an antediluvial, right, civilization and a flood that occurred, right, a kind of a global flood. But many of them recorded these floods. These are latter day, I must say latter day, that after the actual incident, but humanity all over the world, right, that has preserved, their ancient origins or stories and mythologies or parables. Really, they preserve parables and proverbs and symbolic stories of their beginning, all share a commonality in Noach, or in Noah, right? Or this story in their stories that is very similar. Now, there's differences. Of course, there's differences in these different cultures. Depends on where these stories have been recorded. I mean, you ever know a family where there's brothers and sisters in the family, right? And something happened in the family when all the brothers and sisters were together, right? Then they go off their separate ways and they probably retell their children certain stories, but some things change according to what they remember and according to how they're telling the story and according to what they're using in their particular environments, as teaching tools. So this accounts for a lot of the differences, right, in the narrative, right, which is called the flood, or the flood of Noah, the flood at the time of Noah as well. But one thing I discovered that was interesting, because in looking at the 37 images that have been preserved on Greek vases, right? Now you have to remember that the Greeks originally were known as the Javanites, the Javan, or the Yonanawiyan, the Yonah. Yonah, it means dove, like Jonah. So we have Jonah and Yonah. Yonah means dove. Now in the Greco-Latin languages, Jonah or Yonah, dove, the dove is called the colomb, or the colomb as Colombia. Right. So when we see today, there's a lot of references to Colombia, Colombia. We need to connect that with Jonah and the pre-Greeks. I want to call them, they call it Greek today because the victors write the story. So it's the Greeks today who are looking back on everything that happened in that region, but many of them know that this is before the Hellenistic people or the European type of Greeks, right? The Hellenistic people. So there's a difference in Greek culture, right, between the latter day Gentiles or the European, right, or the white Greeks, right, and the original so-called culture, the Ionians. This is where we get the Ionians. This is why we have the name John and Sean, and we have Eon, right? Eon, all referring to the same Johann, right? So you see how the whole Tower of Babel and the languages being confused, the confusion of tongues, right, comes along as well. So in this confusion of tongues, we begin to see in the Noah narrative, right, we look at the Minoans, and then it's right there, a word, sound, and power, Minoans, right, Min Noah, from Noah. They're tracing themselves to their ancestors. So when we look at the word Minoan, right, and Minoan culture, in fact, let's do this right here. Let's open up a window so that those who are viewing the video form of it, this is the first page over here that we want to show you. Okay, this is on Solving Light, this particular website that we saw some years ago. And we really didn't know how to really take this at first, but it was very interesting. This is facts, this is evidence. How does this fit into the big picture? Or does it fit into the big picture? So here we have 37 images of Noah, right, out of their vase scene and sculpted sculpted context, right? And there's a quick summary right here. Now, we don't endorse all the conclusions of the views, but what we use is the fact that a lot of this is evidence that if rightly interpreted, can add to or can fit into or might contradict the biblical context. But even if it contradicts the biblical context, I mean, after all, like we said in our example of a family, brothers and sisters who grew up together and certain things happened in their childhood or some things they were told by the parents, and the parents might have told different children more or less. And you know how some children are. Some children are always jokey and, you know, not very serious and everything. So their stories might, be like a lot of these ancient stories where we can definitely see they're speaking about the same incident. But the context of it, you know how people might twist the story. So the context of it might and does change, as it were, from civilization to the civilization, from context to context. Now we have a little bit of time. We're going to have to get some more current for this right here. So we have a couple of minutes. So we're going to leave this as like a first part, kind of an introduction to this Torah portion, Noch, right? To the second Torah portion, reading and feeding, right? Because we want to counter a lot of the false propaganda. What they would call it the black propaganda, but we call it the white propaganda, the whitewash propaganda, or the Gentile propaganda that has gone on out there, where ones will say it could not have happened or it did not happen like the Bible says, or, who would be upset about the Noah's flood? Most of all, those who are in the same spirits of those spirits before that had to be washed out, right? Because it says, as in the days of Noah, right, so shall it be, right, in this time and in the time of the Son of Man. And we can clearly see that the same abominations, things that have not only been heard about, right, in ancient writings and biblical writings, are actually what's happening on a day-to-day basis. Now, see, this is a lot of the stuff that you will call crazy. You say, oh, that's crazy. How could somebody do that? Well, by understanding how it was in the beginning, might actually add to how it was, how it is really in the end. So here you can see some of the Minoan links. We don't know which one we want to go to. Let's go to the Minoan art. right? Let's just go to some of the Minoan art pics so you can at least get a visual of who the Minoans were, right? Now, the Minoans, many have connected their culture to ancient Egypt. And it's even known that they had interactions, right, with ancient Egypt. And you can see from a lot of their paintings, water is a theme. You see the dolphins there. You see the artifacts. So many say that their culture had a lot in common with ancient Egypt. Well, no doubt that it had a lot in context with ancient Egypt, because ancient Egypt was the first of those 7 world or global empires, right? Those global empires. I mean, some very beautiful paintings that have been found, but then you also see, let's look at some of the racial types. When we look at some of the racial types from the images, we both see the light and the dark, right? Or some will say white and black from this, post white supremacy society, which has really followed faithfully the Luciferian satanistic agenda, right? For skin versus skin. Because see, that's a hurdle for a lot of people to get past that particular context of it, right? That racial context, it creates a kind of a trauma, right? When we say, well, the people in the ancient times in the Bible were black peoples, a lot of people say, oh, that's being racist. It doesn't matter whether they were white or black. And then the hypocrisy that in all of their paintings, they rarely, if ever, display and show black peoples, only in a negative context. But then that makes sense from their European, right? Their European perspective. But that European perspective, it has a global reach, right? Where all have been deceived, right, by the deceptions that they had believed to be true. But you can see clearly that these were they were black people, right? Black, white people. When I say black, white people, I'm just judging by what we see in their art. And we're just going to show you a couple of examples of their art, right? And I see something that's very Ethiopian, if you vibes me in that Ethiopian, Egyptian, that African context. So you can see right here where some of these pictures, you can see how some of the color schemes are lighter or darker, but it's very clear they were, white and black peoples, right? And I'm trying to find one of the arts. There was one particular picture, painting actually that shows it very, very well. Now, a lot of these themes of the bull, we see the bull there. Now, remember the picture we just showed you a little bit earlier? I mean, just a moment ago when we said Ethiopian, a couple of minutes ago. This is another picture of it. Notice the color scheme is different. So there's been a purposeful effort to lighten the images, right? To inordinately lighten them up, right? So as you go through some of them, you'll find some like this. So people say, oh, that must be some, it's also how this is like Mayan, South American. You can see that kind of something within the art right there. And you've seen this image elsewhere. You could look at the eyes, the way they draw the pictures. There's some Egyptian influence, but it's coming from a common origin, right? A common ancestor. Like I said, the original Greeks, right? The original Greeks, so to speak, right, were the Ionians, right? And the most ancient culture that has been unearthed, right, in that region, right, or one of the ancient cultures was the Minoan civilization. Now that's through a lot of the European establishment, right? Because there's a supreme delusion of the European mind. And he was putting out a lot of stuff. And then he came across this art right here where clearly in the art, you can see this one has melanation, overt epidural melanation, even reddish, how the Egyptians also depicted themselves and how black people's complexion also reflects, right, along a reddish hue, right? That's what they call them, colored, colored, colored. The color is red, right? And then you can see the more albinitic people, right, or those who did not have much epidural melanin, right? And this is supposed to be a bull. So, there's the red bull and the color of the bull right there, right? And sometimes the bulls might have spots in them like the cows, so forth and so on. Then we could go to Jacob, Jacob, the spotted cattle, but that's coming up. Hopefully, will, give us inspiration on that. This is also this imagery right here. You can see even it's darker here, right? And this seems like an actual picture, right? This is an actual picture right there. So we're just showing you some of the art. Now, what's interesting is that we find this amongst all of that too. We find that they also call the Cretans. Now, Cretan is also mentioned in the scripture too. Now, what her complexion was, you can see how the face is dark here, but the arms seem to be light. You can see the breastises sticking out, the mammaries, another kind of symbology. Now, some of this, we're not too sure about this right here, but we still include this in our research as well. It must have been a custom for the woman to stick out their breasts. It reminds me of some of the barmaids in some of the Germanic cultures, like in the German bars where they would stick out their titties in the bar. And that would be a very playful thing for, the bar people going to like the German bars, the beer bars and all of that. So we see a lot of cultural, absorption as well. Now, I point to this particular culture, right, in this Noah Torah portion, to give one to kind of a visual as well as historical reference to how it was at that time afterwards. This is more after the flood, right? This is more after the flood, right? When we're pointing to such art right here, we're going to have to come forward and get some of this as well, but we're documenting it right here on this visual right here. If you can only zoom in, then you can really see that it was mainly for lack of a better word, a black culture, right? For lack of a better word, an African or Ethiopic culture. And we're speaking about the Minoans, Minoans, like Ethiopia, Ethiopians, Africa, Africans, Europe, Europeans. So that the n is added there, as a inclusive qualifier. This is also kind of very interesting because this is now Egypt right here, right? This is a picture, I think, from Egypt right here. It's not actually, they say, Minoan art, but yet you can see the similarity. So the original Greeks, right? The original Greeks, so to speak, were black peoples, right? By and large, they were black peoples. Right. And we judge this by their artwork. I mean, come on, it's very clear. You see a white guy like this? I mean, really, they'll try to say, well, look at the features. And we know basically black people are the dominant gene, and all the other races or the other ethnicities, in a sense, did evolve out of black people. So there was an evolution in species, right? According to the species, not the black man evolving from a monkey, but the other races, right? Including, the European, who seems to have an affinity with the monkey all the time. Everybody, this monkey business evolved out of black peoples. And the genetics has proven that, right? Has proven that to be, to be the facts. Notice this right here. Oh, okay. The page flipped up. So we're just showing you some of the art right here. You can actually look at, we'll recommend ones look at more of this for themselves. There's some good documentaries out there. Can't recommend any right now. Notice this right here, almost like the green, yellow, and red as well. Right. So we have the lights and the darks. Right. That very Adamic blend, the lights and the darks, the Asay Yamara and the Ade Amara, right? The two kinds of Amara, the Ade Amara and the Asay Amara, or the so-called whites and the reds. You can see this as well, right? This particular, this is Minoan art, right? The Minoan civilization, right? This is also a good picture right here where you can clearly see the lights and the darks, right? The lights and the darks, the lights and the darks. This might be more actual right there. So the Minoans, right, are the Javanites, right, represent the Javanites from Noah. But now the lights and the darks will be explained when we recognize that Noah, or Noah himself, was, according to the Metzhafe Henoch, or the Book of Enoch, he was one of the first albinos. How interesting is this? He was, they'll say a white man, but that's wrong to consider him a white man as we consider white men today, and we'll go into explanation of that. But it's very clear. We see right here Minoan art, right? You know, Minoan art, right? So we have to imagine, well, what did these people look like? Is this a goddess, a form of goddess worship right here? Oh, did I tell you that civilization eventually was destroyed, right? And, you know, with some very like Sodom and Gomorrah type of volcano activities. So we're looking at the same imagery right here, right? You know, we're looking at the same imagery right here. So who is that woman? And the whole snake goddess, right? There's a snake goddess metaphor that is also very strong within the Minoan civilization. But the Minoan civilization gives us a racial historical context, right, of ancient peoples, right? Where we see people essentially that have the same type of features, but black, right, or red, black, reddish, brown, light skin, and dark skin. Basically, we have this blend of a light skin and dark skin. And this is just the overt. This is just like an overview. This is what we get as a flyover image, right? A flyover point of view. As we get into the details, we can then address some of the goddess worship, the serpent worship, as well as the destruction, right, that occurred with that civilization, where some say that is somehow linked perhaps to the time of the Exodus, right, of the Hebrews, right? And whether Mount Vesuvius, you know, or whether Krakatoa, you know, I think that documentary that was done, Egypt Decoded, also speculates on some of the similar themes, right? Some of the similar themes that we, you know, that we have, right? So it definitely shows us that the Bible, the scriptures, is correct. It's consistent. Because a lot of these other cultures either don't last long enough to tell the whole story, or when we look at how they told the story, they told the story radically, you know, different, right? Radically different. Now, this is an interesting one from ancient Egypt right here, right? Because if you look at this one right here in ancient Egypt, you remember the sea peoples? The Egyptians talked about the sea peoples. You notice that these are some of the sea peoples here, but you notice the difference? The complexion of the pharaoh or the Egyptian king or ruler, right? And also the complexion of the horse. And then these are all like, kind of like, seem like white peoples, right? These I think are the sea peoples as well, right? And then we have later on the time of the Hebrews, right? Or what is linked to the Hebrew time. And then if you look at some of this is supposed to be Ahmosis or Ahmose of Thebes, single-handedly, right, defeating the Hyksos in a celebratory painting. The Egyptians learned about chariots from the Hyksos, they say, right? And Egyptian chariot technology rapidly forged ahead. Egyptian chariots actually carried two men, the driver and the archer, with a compound bow. Now remember, David says, teach the children of Judah the use of the bow. Now, the book of Enoch tells us that the weapons of warfare were taught to the children of humanity by the fallen watchers or the fallen angels, or some will say the giants and the Nephilim, and that's a whole other related aspect. But if you look at the race of the people, right, it's very interesting because this is really a Canaanitish people. They say it's the Hyksos, right? They basically say it's the Hyksos, but we'll have to go into a little more detail on that right there. Hyksos began to mean to the ancient Egyptians immigrants. It's like today they talk about immigrants, although immigrants might come from all over. Now this is interesting because this is they have this as Minoan art, right? Minoan art, but you can very clearly see this is under Ethiopian. This is Ethiopian art. So we can see certain similarities, right, here in these people. So when they talk about, oh, the Egyptians, the Ethiopians and the Greek culture, right? Remember, it basically is coming out of ancient black culture, right? Well, for lack of a better word, right, in a post so-called white supremacist society would be a black world. So we see some of the art right here. So we're going to kind of sum up right here for a moment, because in looking at all of these kind of images, it's very, very interesting. Take a moment, a pause for the cause, and then we'll address this in a little more detail right here. The 30 all over the world, right, that has preserved, their ancient origins or stories and mythologies or parables. Really, they preserve parables and proverbs and symbolic stories of their beginning, all share a commonality in Noah, or in Noah, right? Or this story in their stories that is very similar. Now, there's differences. Of course, there's differences in these different cultures. Depends on where these stories have been recorded. You ever know a family where there's brothers and sisters in the family, right? And something happened in the family when all the brothers and sisters were together, right? Then they go off their separate ways and they probably retell their children certain stories, but some things change according to what they remember and according to how they're telling the story and according to what they use. Our Father, his Abba, our Abba, his Elohim, our Elohim, the true El Elohe Israel. We, the lost, now found black sheep of the house of Israel. So we're touching on Noah, right, or Noah, right, in the Bible. Something interesting just occurred to I, because we want to show you 37 images, at least the website is solvinglight.com, where they present certain evidence and also speculate on, the truism of the Noah, the biblical story, and also the recording of this self-same, or similar rather, this similar, not the same, but there are similarities, interesting similarities. Now, there's many who really question whether there was Noah's flood. I think that questioning comes from the spirit of the children of disobedience in that sense. And just because you question doesn't mean that you're one of the children, but that is in the conspiracy or breathing together. That's in the spirit, if you can understand. That's in the spirit of doubting something that is obvious. If all these ancient cultures, right, which were as diverse and different from the Hebrew, also recorded an antediluvial, right, civilization and a flood that occurred, right, a kind of a global flood. But many of them recorded these floods. These are latter day, I say latter day, that after the actual incident, but humanity in their particular environments, as teaching tools. So this accounts for a lot of the differences, right, in the narrative, right, which is called the flood, or the Noah, the flood of Noah, the flood at the time of Noah as well. But one thing I discovered that was interesting, because in looking at the 37 images that have been preserved on Greek vases, right? Now you have to remember that the Greeks originally were known as the Javanites, the Javan, or the Yonanawiyan, the Yonah. Yonah, it means dove, like Jonah. So we have Jonah and Yonah. Yonah means dove. Now in the Greco-Latin languages, Jonah or Yonah, dove, the dove is called the kolom or the kolum. Shabbat shalom, senbet salam. This is Wyndham Yarden, and this is our second Torah portion reading and feeding, or what's known as Noch, right? Noch in the Ethiopic, in the first language, and also called Noah. This Torah portion, before we even get directly into it, there's some contextual facts and evidence that I want to share with my brothers, my Wendemoch, and with others to also study and compare and contrast along with your studies in this Torah portion, reading and feeding. So once again, Shabbat Shalom, Senbet Salam, Yeshua Shalom, and Yeshua's Shem, in the Hashem of Yeshua HaMoshiach, to the glory of Einai Abba and Father, his Father.